Welcome to VE-80 in Bickerton. It's wonderful to be able to come together to celebrate the end of World War II and to remember and give thanks for the service and sacrifice of so many to protect our freedoms. We are privileged to have some recollections from some friends and family to watch. It has been my pleasure to interview 4 people about life during World War II and in particular Victory in Europe Day 80 years ago. We will hear from David Wood, who lives in Bickerton and will be 90 on the 10th of July 2025. He was nearly 10 on VE Day. Doreen Dunning lived in Bickerton for 50 years. She was born 100 years ago on the 23rd of April 1925 in Armley in Leeds and has just celebrated her 100th birthday with her card from the King and Queen. She was 20 on VE Day. And my mum and dad, who have lived in Edinburgh all their lives. Mum was born 17 January 1933 and was 12 on VE Day, and Dad, who was born 23rd of May 1932 and was nearly 13 on VE Day. Thank you to all of them for sharing with us.
My first memory of World War II is being with a friend of mine in West Park in North Leeds. And when the siren went, we all had to go out into their garden because in their back garden they had a steel shelter, and we had to go into this shelter and sit in the shelter until the all clear sounded. That is my first memory. My second memory is being in my dad's house in Filey, and my sister and I were upstairs. We'd been sent to bed. And the siren went to indicate that the bombers were coming over from Germany, and we had to put our dressing gowns on, come downstairs, and my sister and I sheltered underneath the stairs. Many houses had a little room or shelter underneath the stairs, and we sat in there in our dressing gowns, probably with a cup of tea or a biscuit or something, until the all clear went, and then when the all clear, Dad came out, opened the door. He said, "Come on, children, you can go back up to bed." Another memory about the end of the war was that when my mum and Dad took me into their bedroom, they said that we've got some good news, David. The war has finished, and also she said you can have one of these. And she handed me an a yellowy orange coloured fruit. And what's that? She said, well, bananas are available now. And I tried to bite it with the skin on, not knowing that I should peel it. So I peeled it and ate the banana. And that was the first banana that I'd had in my life.
At the beginning of the war, 1939, I was 6 years old, and I vividly remember being in Victoria Park, which was very near to us, and we were walking on the putting green, and all of a sudden we heard this aircraft approaching, and the noise of a German aircraft is very different from our aircraft. It seems to start and stop. Doesn't literally do that, but it sounds a bit like that. And I remember I was with my next door neighbour, his mother and my mother and I, Robin and I were together, 6 years old, and I can vividly remember this plane approaching us very low. I can remember watching the Nazis, this crisscross signs of a German plane just above our heads, and we were trying to shelter under the trees. I remember seeing his face. I can vividly remember it. And we watched the plane, he could have killed us easily. We watched the plane go over towards Leith Docks, and we saw the bomb falling from that plane, which landed in the then George Street, Leith. That was my first impressions of the war. We were terrified, but we had some happy memories of the war because during a blitz, usually happened during the night when enemy planes were coming overhead. We used to go across the road. There was a big building across the road from our house, and it was called the Scott Lion Building, and it was a big bakery all the workers lived in the tenements above it, and they had an underground place where they stored all their flour, fruit, etc. And Robin and I used to love going down there in our little siren suits, Winston Churchill siren suits, and we used to love being wakened up. We didn't like being wakened up, but we used to love being taken down there, because we used to, I don't know if our parents knew this, we used to sit and eat the sultanas and the raisins. So that's probably how we survived the war, actually, because the rations were appalling. We were all starving a bit. And that went on even after the war. Our rations were very poor during the war, but not very much better after the war. On VE Day, I was 12-year-old, and I can remember trying to find red, white and blue clothes. I remember Elma and I walking along Princess Street, crowds of people cheering, especially at the Mound in Edinburgh, cheering, and Mark, we weren't allowed out too late. But it was just amazing to think that the war was ending. But you must remember that VE Day was wonderful, but there was still horrible war going on in Burma. My cousin Willie was fighting the Japs in Burma, and when he eventually managed to come home, he would not talk about it. It had been so horrendous. Now, at the end of the war, people were demobbed gradually. It didn't happen immediately, and my sister, who had been on ACAT guns, as I've said, was on a special sort of duty, welcoming back repatriated prisoners of war. I think I've said that her boyfriend had been killed during the war, and when they were each allocated one prisoner of war coming home, and the prisoner of war that she welcomed was a certain man called Peter. But she welcomed this Peter and was getting him a mob suit, and 2 years later they were married.
When I asked my dad, Ian, about the war, he said simply, bloody war. He sadly lost his mum Nellie on the 4th of December 1939 at the start of the war when he was 7. He had to live with his mum's sister, Auntie Sissy, as his dad was serving in the Merchant Navy and was at sea. On the 8th of March 1942, his ship, the Hengist, sailing home from Iceland, was torpedoed and sunk by U-boat 569, and Papa was in the sea for hours until he was rescued. That meant many anxious days waiting for news. Dad said he was alarmed and frightened. At last the news that he had survived came. Dad's first thought on VE Day was that his dad would come home. We often teased Dad about the way he stored all his sweet rations, and unfortunately he left too long and they went fusty, as we say, or inedible. He will recount that for us.
I kept my sweetie rations for some time, and when I came to eat them, they had deteriorated.
They were in a tin. Yeah, and you could eat them.
13 at the end of World War II, and one of my greatest memories was of the contributions by Winston Churchill. He obviously planned many events so that the German nation could no longer play their part in fighting against the British forces.
During the war, I worked as a secretary at Brook Bond in Leeds. My memories of VE Day are not as vivid as some of the other important incidents which occurred during the war. Of course, we were very glad to receive the announcement of the cessation of one theatre of war from our great leader Winston, but so many of our friends were away in the forces, and we were also beginning to realise just what our enemies were capable of. We rejoiced there would be no more buzz bombs or raids on our towns, but the Japanese had still to be defeated, and we knew of the terrible atrocities of which they were capable. The day itself was spent with the friends who were still left to us, and as my passion at that time was dancing, 7 or 8 of us met at the large tent erected on Woodhouse Moor for dancing. The venue had to be assembled in a great rush, so my recollection was of dancing on grass, there being insufficient time to lay a wooden floor. I remember also that only soft drinks were available, and as it had been for so long, buses all ceased running at 10 o'clock, so all dances finished before that time. That didn't mean we had to go home at that time, because we were far from running out of steam, but we did know after we finished our celebrations we would have to walk home.
The Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Winston Churchill.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Forces and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May. But in the interest of saving lives, the ceasefire began yesterday to be sounded along all the fronts. And our dear Channel Islands are also to be freed today. The German war is therefore at an end. After years of intense preparation, Germany hurled herself on Poland at the beginning of September 1939. And in pursuance of our guarantee to Poland, and in common with the French Republic, Great Britain, the British Empire, and Commonwealth of Nations declared war upon this foul aggression. After gallant France had been struck down, we from this island and from our united empire maintained the struggle single-handed for a whole year, until we were joined by the military might of Soviet Russia and later by the overwhelming power and resources of the United States of America. Finally, almost the whole world was combined against the evildoers, who are now prostrate before us. Our gratitude to our splendid allies goes forth from all our hearts in this island and throughout the British Empire. We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing, but let us not forget for a moment the toils and efforts that lie ahead. Japan remains unsubdued. We must now devote all our strength and resources to the completion of our tasks, both at home and abroad. Advance, Britannia. Long live the cause of freedom. God save the King.
Greater and greater crowds surge around the palace railings as onto the balcony come the royal family, accompanied by our Prime Minister himself.